welcome to the Craft Brewed Music Podcast, the official podcast of Craft Brewed Music, the home of small batch streaming. Here we explore better music for serious listeners and those who create it. I'm Brian Horner, founder and curator of Craft Brewed Music, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host Aaron Stamen, a Craft Brewed Music artist.
It was not an empty statement to say that, talking to Richard Bennett was one of the highlights of my year. And amidst all of the dread of, working in the hospital with the virus very present, and my feelings of sadness about what's going on a world away in Armenia, where I have friends and did the Peace Corps years ago, and then the the turmoil in this country and the seemingly unbridgeable divide between perceptions of the world that no outcome of election is going to solve, and the path to reconciliation is just so difficult to fathom. In the midst of all that, having a conversation with a musician whose work is so transcendent for me, is the way I want things to sound, and the way I want to hear music, that it makes it all wash away.
Absolutely,
for a period of time, and I'm really grateful that we had the opportunity to do it.
Want to hear about his first experience, literally the first moments that he worked with Mark Knopfler, and also to hear about his evolution from working in the studios, realizing other people's visions, to getting back in touch with his own artistic sensibilities and self, was really a rich conversation.
and as he tells it, almost kind of reluctantly stumbling into composing an album.
Right. And so to kick it off, let's hear a tune from Richard Bennett, who guitar players Rick Allen called "One Sweet, Swinging, Soulful, Cool, Rocking, Jazzbo Cowboy Guitar Player." This is "The Proud and the Profane" from Richard's debut album, Themes from a Rainy Decade.
Brian and I have always been very interested in these kind of formative, transcendent musical experiences where you you hear something and you've listened to music on the radio, you've listened to music in other places, but you hear something and suddenly you're like, oh my God, why don't I feel this way all the time
Hmm.
when I hear music?
Yeah.
And one of the things that caught my eye looking through your website and reading the notes from Nashville was I think it was back in March. You were reflecting on all the things you can do with your isolated life, and one of them was kind of rediscovering your LP collection that you'd started from your teenage years. And I'm wondering, since this is a show about a listening service, what did you discover in that journey?
The thing that always uh, tickles me, I suppose, is every once in a while, you'll think back to a record from your childhood, maybe, that you haven't listened to maybe since you were a child. And you go fish it out and you drop a needle onto it. And the same thing that that sparked you as a child, and I'm talking about a child, not even a teenager, you know, 6, 5, 6, 7 years old. The same little moments in the record that buzzed you then still do now, Hmm. nearly 70 years old, and you think, wow, man, there was something firing in my brain at that, even at that age. And
Can, can you remember the last one of those that you came across?
oh God, well, yes, there was a record called "Endless Sleep" by Jody Reynolds, and it was a very dark record. Uh, the lyric was about a suicide.
Hmm.
This guy's girl takes herself off to throw herself in the angry sea, and the actual record itself had this great dark undertow. The sound of it, and that would have been about 1958, and that was Jody Reynolds, and I would have been 58. I was, I guess, 7 years old. I guess I was, and it would come on the radio. And as a child, you don't understand the lyrics per se, but the record had such a dark vibe to it, and it scared the hell out of me as a child. And but of course, I'd wait by the radio for them to play it over and over, and that record still does that for me.
You still feel the fear?
Oh yeah, man, just the darkness of it, the Hmm. darkness of it, and I just love the sound of records. Either nothing sounds like records. It's still the best sounding format to me.
Yeah.
And 78s, I got to tell you, people think of 78s these terribly scratchy things, and of course, if they've not been taken care of, they are. But man, a clean 78, particularly from about 1948 to when they quit making them in 58. By 1948, the manufacturers had, eliminated surface noise, period. And because of the velocity of 78 revolutions a minute and the size and the width and depth of the grooves in a
Mhm.
78, man, you can pack so much uh, signal into that. It will tear your head off how good they sound. The fidelity is ridiculous. We clearly need to have a listening party at your house once that's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, post-vaccine, come to my house.
So
Yes.
when you complete one of your recordings, do you always get it printed on a on vinyl so that you can hear it in that format to see if it's realized the way you imagined it?
Yeah, no, I don't. I don't. I should, but I don't. Um, yeah, it would be nice to get a lacquer cut and at least listen to it. But
Yeah.
I trust the engineer I use, and I trust my ears and the mastering guy. And funnily enough, one of the old albums, um, Code Red Cloud 9,
Hmm.
is being re-released on vinyl
Hmm.
uh, early next year.
by a company called Yield Brother Records.
How'd that come about?
Well, um, the guy who owns the label, or who is the label, has been a fan for a long time. And, he contacted me 2 or 3 years ago with this idea to do it. He wanted to start the label for that record initially. And I kind of held him at arm's length, and I just didn't want him to lose any money. I thought he'd lose his ass on the thing. And he just kept after me, and we became friends. And so we're going to do it. And it's already in manufacture. I've listened to the test pressings, and it sounds fantastic. Really sounds great.
That'll be a great addition to the collection.
Yeah,
And I think there's a market for it too. At least a couple times a month, I do like a Zoom cocktail hour with some friends from back east, and most of those guys are into their vinyl collection, and they get things that are released all the time. That's definitely they are your target audience for that kind of thing.
yeah, yeah, that's right. Um, I mean, if anybody's interested in who's listening to this, if you go to it's Yield, Yield, brother, records.com. And the page is already up and they're taking pre-orders, and I think it'll be available in January.
Oh,
But
excellent.
it's well in the works. And
Well, that's great.
yeah, 180 gram vinyl and all of that.
Brian and I were when we were talking about your solo work. We noticed three dominant trends, and one was the Western swing and jazz. Another was this homage and perfect crystallization of kind of 50s rock progressions. And then
Hmm.
the third one was songs that evoke the Southwest.
Yeah,
And I wanted to ask you more specifically about this kind of recurring character in your songs as the
yeah, yeah.
Southwest.
I know. Well, I was raised in Phoenix, so that pretty much tells the whole story. Um, I one of the albums was called Valley of the Sun,
Hmm.
which was kind of my tip of the hat of all that music I was growing up with in the early '60s through that decade, um, before I moved to Hollywood. Uh,
And so, was that the sound that you kind of, uh, you know, came of age with as a player?
Sort of, yeah. And some of it is just manifest itself through kind of vague memory of it,
Yeah, yeah.
rather than anything too specific. Um, but I was talking with my friend Dwayne Eddy, and Dwayne has that thing too. There's a certain desert um, thing that's in your playing. It somehow gets in your blood, and it's hard to describe what it is. I can't tell you, but Phoenix had a thing, and I'm sure New Mexico and all of that Southwest down there did. I don't know what it is. I should be better prepared for these questions, I suppose, but it's just something that gets in you. I can't describe it, you know.
Was there radio from south of the border that you were exposed to?
Not necessarily, but there was all kinds of music going on in town. In fact, the that album that I sort of tipped my hat to Phoenix, it's fairly disparate in its scope, I suppose, but that's what Phoenix was. You know, you had young teen bands who were doing their version of, you know, rock and roll of the day and Mersey beat and surf music. And, you know, you had jazz flying around, you had pop music flying around, of course you had country music, you had Mexican music, you had Indian music, Native American music. Um, and at that time, in the 60s, there was still a couple of Polynesian clubs in Phoenix that had live Polynesian reviews. Hawaiian music was still a thing then. And a lot of people were still playing steel guitar, like Hawaiian guitar, not necessarily country or pedal steel, playing Hawaiian guitar. The guy who taught me how to play guitar was a great Hawaiian guitar player. Um,
So that's actually a question that I was hoping to get into, whether that was something that was uh, a later discovery or something that developed in parallel with your guitar playing.
yeah, it was pretty much in parallel. Um, I, I I started playing guitar and then I kind of started dabbling around with steel a couple of years later. Um, but the guy who taught me, Forrest Skaggs, um, was a fabulous Hawaiian guitar player and Western guitar player as well, steel player.
Hmm.
But he'd come up on the West Coast in the 30s and 40s, and he knew guys like Saul Hoopy and Dick McIntyre, and so many of the Hawaiians who had become transplanted to the West Coast to L.A. And so anyway, he was forever playing. You know, I learned how to play rhythm guitar with him playing Hawaiian tunes on steel, and I'd play rhythm guitar to him. That's how I learned my chords. So I developed a real love for Hawaiian music, and and the instrument steel guitar.
diversity as a musician was started early,
It did, yeah.
which then kind of became emblematic of your career as well. You've had success in as a player, as a producer, songwriter, in the studio, on the road. Was that did you just set out to be a guitar player, or were you kind of nowadays we tell young musicians you need to try to be you need to diversify and try to do a lot of different things. Was that just
Yeah.
brilliant on your part, or was it was
No,
it by chance?
I just set out to be a guitar player, and got got very lucky. And because I certainly wasn't very good um, at the start, but I had a lot of desire, and and I just stayed with that. And I had some really very lucky breaks. Um, One in that um, the fellow who taught me, who I mentioned, Four Skaggs, had a student about 15 years prior named Al Casey, and Al Casey had gone on to become one of the Wrecking Crew guitar
Hmm.
players. And Al took me under his wing, and he was like my rabbi in to the business.
Hmm.
Um, and I learned so much from him. And of course, there are no guarantees. You can't. He couldn't make that happen, but he gave me a place to be. And I met everybody through him. So that was a fabulous bit of luck. You know, and then things began happening after that. I just kind of fall uh, face first into other things.
I remember having, I lived in Nashville for 20 years from around 2000 to about last year. And early in that time, I
Mhm.
remember getting the Kim Ritchie album, Kim Ritchie's first self-titled album that
Right.
you produced, and just
Yeah.
loving the kind of jangly sound on that. In addition, of course, to her voice, and now going back to that, I can hear in parts of that kind of some of your sound as well in the some of the instrumentation and vibes in that.
Yeah. I can't get rid of it. That's just me. Um,
Well,
well, something I listen. I always loved that album. I love Kim, and I loved making that record with her. Um, and I listened to it a couple of years ago, and the only thing I would take back is the goddamn drums are too loud. But but all the drums were too loud back then.
I was going to say that's probably more a major label radio attempt relic,
Look
but
at
no,
us.
it's
We're rock and roll. We think we're rock and roll.
right. It's a great record though,
It is
and
a great record. There's great songs on there.
Aaron and I have listened to Mark Knopfler forever as well,
Hmm.
and you know you've had, as you've said, you've been very fortunate to play with in some of the best settings there are.
Yeah. It's yeah, it's been a real spoiler. The two the two kind of long-term associations I've had with Neil Diamond and Mark Knopfler. Man, it's just top drawer all the way.
Absolutely. And it seems like there's clearly you're capable of doing anything you want with the guitar, but it's interesting to hear how you approach these settings. You're not kind of coming in with the whole gunslinger guitar thing. We were doing an interview, our last episode, with Davina Lozier of Davina and the Vagabonds,
Right.
who made her most recent record in Nashville, and had not planned to use a guitarist, had never used a guitarist, and was hesitant to do so because she said, guitar players just play so many notes. They're always
Yeah.
playing, and so Doug Lancio was who she was working with, or who the producer wanted to bring in, and she ended up being thrilled with the result.
Yeah.
But you're a kind of player that somebody with that concern would be very pleased with. You're kind of always there to support the song and play very tastefully.
Yeah. Well, you're there to that's it exactly. You're there to serve the song. And Mark and I talk about this all the time. That's how he feels about himself too.
Hmm.
He sees himself as a songwriter first, and the guitar comes along as part of the package, but it's there to serve the song. And, as far as me, I've never been that facile of a guitar player to where I can spray a million notes around. I just never have been that guy.
Hmm.
So I have to rely on other things to make it happen. And one of them is having a song to play as opposed to having some platform to go blow your brains out on. I'm not that guy. I admire people like that, but at some point you just have to shake hands with who you are and your strengths and uh, begin begin really taking those seriously and developing that. And it took me a long time to get there. Particularly doing the studio thing, the whole um, job requisite with that is to be as many things as you can be
Mm-hmm.
to as many people as you can be. And so you're
Mm-hmm.
constantly chasing everything. And it's fine. It's great. It makes for some very good versatility. But sometimes you get lost in the chase.
Well, it must be hard to develop your own voice.
Exactly right. And very often when you come into that, if you're fortunate enough to be able to find your way into the studios, you usually come in with a bit of your own voice. And I've seen it happen to a lot of guys that they lose track of of that. I
Hmm.
certainly did. I certainly did. And
Hmm.
it wasn't until I was 50 that I began to finally shake hands with um, all the things that I'm not, and it's plenty, believe me. But also the things that I am, and really start working on that, you know, and writing tunes to showcase that.
And what inspired that at age 50? What you had obviously all the career you needed. What brought you to that point where you wanted to figure that out and
Well,
go there?
I mean, I'd always, write the occasional tune, and I had a little batch of them around that I started thinking, I should demo these things and see if I can get some placement action with them.
Hmm.
So that's how the first album actually started out.
The
And
themes from a rainy decade.
yeah, the Rainy Decade album. Yeah, that's right.
Great,
And
wonderful album.
and so anyway, that's what I did. I set about to demo 4 or 5 of them, and everybody was saying, the guys who were playing on it, the engineer, man, this is going to be a great album. And I kept saying, no, it's not an album. I don't want to make an album. I never really wanted to make an album. And then I demoed a few more and wrote a few more, and they started going together in a certain way and having a certain sound. And I thought, well, shit, I don't know. Maybe I'm making an album. It was really, it was the last thing I'd intended to do. And so anyway, by about 2/3 of the way through, I thought, okay, I'm making an album, and I wrote the rest of it. And after that, I was completely hooked, and I'm addicted to it now.
Yeah, I was going to say you ended up with six and working on a seventh
Yeah, yeah,
by my count.
and it was just the best thing I ever did because it really, again, the whole process of that focused me up again on who I was, and also opened up some other areas that I wanted to pursue, and that I think anyway has developed from that first album. With each album, I feel they keep getting better. I may be deluding myself, but that's what I think. Also, my studio career has slowed down as the business has slowed down, and
Hmm.
also it's just the natural arc of that career. So I really have a purpose for keeping a guitar in my hand.
Hmm.
Do you find when you do go back in for studio gigs that in the last 20 years, say, that process of making your own albums, are you going back into the studio for other people, bringing more of yourself to that?
Yes, yeah, because I feel less obliged to wear every hat now.
Hmm.
Um, you know, I'm in my late 60s, and fuck it. If you've called me, you're going to get me now,
Hmm.
for better or worse. I assume that you want me if you've called me. So
Of these two long-term collaborations that you've been part of, one with Neil Diamond, one with Mark Knopfler, because of that change that took place in you with your own songwriting and your change in attitude, did that change your approach to how you functioned as a studio collaborator and as a sideman?
not really. Uh, I kind of had a solid thing pretty early on with Neil, and that I figured out how that worked, and that was definitely me. There was no, um, but with Mark, the same thing. I mean, we have a way of working together that it's just me. It's me. Um, when I initially got the call to do the first batch of sessions I did with Mark, which would have been in 1994, um, you know, I thought, gee, you know, what does he want with me? And what the hell am I going to bring to this? And so anyway, we turned up. They booked about 3 days of sessions, and everybody turned up on the first day. And everybody was a little nervous. It was a big deal to record with Mark, and he's very sweet, and he put everybody at ease right away. And we got running down the first tune, and the way he runs a tune down is you just take it on acoustic guitar, and everybody kind of gather around and listen to the song, and he'll run it three, four, 5 times. And at some point, somebody will, grab a piece of paper and start to write out a chart. And you're just listening, you're learning the tune, you're thinking about what you might play. And I remember sitting right in front of him, and I sat there and on purpose because I wanted to watch him while he played while he ran the tune down. And what I was doing was watching what and where he on the instrument he was playing, in what register he was playing, and what he was playing. And the reason I did that, because it told me exactly where not to play and where not to be. So that eliminated a big chunk of stuff. So I could then begin thinking around the edges of that to contribute something.
Hmm.
And also, after the course of a couple of rundowns, there was a little line that ran through my head through a couple of the intro and the interlude and the outro, little, single note line. And so anyway, eventually we all kind of got in our places in the studio and got on our instruments, and we did a run through on the headphones. And I thought, well, here it goes. I'm gonna either live or die by this. And I played the little line I had in my head when we, were running down the intro and the tune. And at the end of the rundown, Mark said, "Man, what is that? That's great. Do you know what you did?" I said, "Yeah, I know." He said, "Do that again." And and so that kind of set the mold for how he and I work. And I'm not there to get in his spotlight or elbow him out of the way. I'm there to be creative, and to add to things. But I'm not trying to edge into that spotlight. That's his spotlight, you know. And anyway, as I said earlier, you're there to serve the song anyway, including him. So everybody's on the same page.
Well, that's fascinating, and certainly one of the things we were interested in. Being the guitarist in
Yeah,
Mark's band.
yeah. It's a funny spot. I mean, it's one of the most rewarding bands I've ever been in. The musicianship in that band, and the awareness and the listening that goes on between people, and the musicianship is just spectacular. And of course, Mark is such a great all around musician, not just a guitar player.
Hmm.
And so it's a huge responsibility. Everybody feels, but there's just that added dollop of cream that I happen to be the other guitar player in
Right.
the thing. And so it's a challenge, and it's one I adore. It's so
Hmm.
rewarding.
Rudiger stands in the rain and the snow.
So, we went through all your records, and we, usually will narrow down, the few songs we want to include in the podcast. And I
Yeah,
think right now with you, our list is at what, like 13 or something, right?
We have a really hard time deciding, Richard. I
uh,
mean, there's so many songs. Like I made a list this morning, and it's obnoxiously long, but just
I'm
because I
honored.
can't decide.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. Um, yeah, I like to make music that I hope that I make music, but the way I like to receive music these days is I just don't like to be beat over the head anymore. I used to love that, um, but I just want music that opens its arms and invites you in to it, as opposed to you know trying to make some kind of statement or. Um, so that's what I try. I hope these things do
I, I
that.
I think it's very the mission is very effective, and I think as you mentioned, starting with the melody
Yeah,
is the kind of the first 10%, and but allowing that to be the primal element in the tune,
yeah.
and have everything else serve that. It definitely comes through in these songs that they're very well constructed to serve that melodic phrase. I think one of the things that makes your tune so effective is the tone selections.
Mm,
The guitars are incredibly throaty and thick, and you can play these simple turns of melody and have a little warble of the tremolo effect, a little dip of those minor chords with the Bigsby, and like it's just so rich, and it's like a human voice, and it sounds very intentional and very powerful
yeah,
when its tones come across. I think there's a lot of that missing in modern guitar music as well.
yeah. Well, thanks. That is the point. It's hopefully it's like a voice. You try to make it sing and phrase like you were singing it. Um, and as far as the tone thing goes, believe me, I've had decades of playing distorted guitar and all of that. And man, I'm just over it. If I don't hear one more distorted guitar, it'll be too soon. And again, it's the road less traveled. So I'm happy to take it. You know.
And are you much of a gear guy, or are you more of a guitar chord amp
Yeah,
kind of player?
yeah, that's me. A guitar, a chord into the amp, stuff a microphone in front of it, open up the fader, and music comes in.
Yeah.
Uh,
And if there's tremolo on the amp, we'll use that. If there's a plate reverb on the amp, we'll use that.
yeah, I tend not to use verb on the amp. I tend to prefer after the fact
Hmm.
um, reverb or echo. If there's tremolo on the amp and I need that, I'll use the amp tremolo. If I'm using an amp that doesn't have tremolo, I've just got a couple little, uh, a stop box. But I tend not to use effects. I tend
Hmm.
to whatever effect is on the guitar is generally done when we mix it after the fact, so I tend to record very uh, dry, you know,
Hmm.
and it's very simple, really. It's the
That's interesting because a lot of guitar players will say, I need to have like the grease on there to like to play the line properly. You're fine recording dry.
I am. I may get a little, I may get a little echo or verb in the phones when I'm playing, but I tend not to lean on effects. And again, it's not that I'm against them. It's just it's the road less traveled. The simplest way is nobody seems to be doing it. Everything seems so processed to me, and I don't know. You just get a nice big clean signal to hit the mic and
Hmm.
to get onto tape or to get onto whatever format you're recording, and then you can do whatever you want with it. But I've always found that um, when you load a bunch of stuff up, uh, you know, before it hits the amp, and you've got all this processed sound coming out of the amp, and then you stuff a mic in front of it. It just sounds small to me. I don't know,
Compressed.
compressed and just about the size of a dime or something.
Yeah.
To where if you do some of your processing post, first off the studio equipment is so much more high end. It just sounds more expensive, and it is. Um, it just sounds better. It's a better fidelity to do some of that post or all of it post. Um, but in my case, I'm not looking for a lot of processing anyway. So, uh, I'm just straight into the amp and put a mic in front of it, take it in.
Yeah. That the very first Dire Straits album back in, I guess it came out in '77. I heard it much later though, after I had been exposed to a lot of high gain
Yeah,
rock guitar.
yeah,
And it was my mom brought that album home, and for some reason I just connected with it, and it was
yeah,
that clean Strat sound with a little bit of reverb, and that's it. And you could
yeah,
hear everything those fingers were doing on that fretboard, and that made sense to me. It was
yeah,
one of those moments.
yeah. I'm with you. I'm with you. And again, if you think back to the time to 77, that was the road less traveled as well. And I think that's part of why, uh, of course, with the great songs, but I think that's part of why that band stood out so much.
Yeah.
You know, particularly for the first album. It was so unusual for its time.
Was, yeah, so understated.
You still had remnants of punk around, and you had the new wave thing going on, and it was clearly neither of those things.
Did you remember hearing it at the time it came out?
I remember it very well. I remember buying that album. I was in England at the time visiting my in-laws. We were visiting my wife's brother and his family, and we were in Manchester, and we were at the Arndale Center, the shopping center, and uh, yeah, I remember buying that album there at the Arndale Center, and then to end up being in that orbit, with
Right.
Mark, yeah, it's just
Yeah.
incredible. That association for me has been you learn at every turn, every session you do, even if it's something you don't like, you learn something from it. Every situation I've learned from, but man, I've learned so much uh, through my association with him. Some specific guitar little things, but a much broader overall um, scope of things. It's just been
Yeah.
a great
But
association.
his interest and use of kind of Celtic themes and Scottish music, is that something that was a new discovery for you, or were you independently already into that?
Um, well, I was aware of it, of course, but it was my first sort of toe into some of these things. Yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting how people with that Celtic sensibility fall into bluegrass so easily.
don't they? Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
Right, the whole connection with the Appalachian thing, which sort of shows up in this new record you're working on. I guess you shared a couple tracks with us, which are more acoustic in
Oh yeah,
nature.
yeah, yeah. Um, that's another album that's all over the place. But over the 20 or so years that I've been writing for my albums, I guess. Um, every once in a while there'd be a little kind of a folky kind of melody turn up, and I'd go ahead and finish it off, but they never quite seemed to fit into the other albums, and I ended up with a folder that actually marked folk
Hmm.
on, and I'd finish the tune, I'd write them out on manuscript, and I'd throw it in that folder. And as I was finishing up the Ballads and Otherness record, a couple more just sort of delivered themselves onto my doorstep, and in my mind's doorstep. And fairly quickly, I wrote them and I wrote them out. Went to the folk folder and threw them in there, and I was surprised how many uh, tunes had accumulated in there over the 20 years. And I began playing through them, and how many of the tunes um, still held water for me as compositions.
Hmm.
And I'd been thinking for a little while, I really would like to make some kind of a different album. And I had no idea what that was going to look like. And there it was all sitting right in front of me. It was already written. Um, and then I wrote a couple more tunes in that one. But it's not, it's kind of folk all over the place. Um, and I've treated these things in ways that would be different than what that folk label might conjure
Mm-hmm.
to some people. The reason I'm calling them folk is at their root, they're very simple folky melodies. I'm calling it a folk album, and I may be the only one who hears it that way, but I'm sticking to it.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. It's been really fun and interesting.
Oh man, I'm flattered and honored to do it, and honestly, I'm really flattered to be part of the Craft Brewed roster.
Well, we're thrilled to have you, and it's a good fit. Thanks for listening. For info on the Craft Brewed Music streaming service, visit craftbrewedmusic.com. Please feel free to rate, review, and share the show. See you next time.